Behind every bottle of water is a hidden world of laboratory testing, regulatory battles, and scientific standards. But who is actually making sure your water is safe? In this deep dive, we are exposing the complete framework of how bottled water is tested, regulated, and why the industry is currently undergoing a massive scientific revolution. Let's start with something most people get wrong. Most people assume the EPA regulates bottled water. It does not. The Environmental Protection Agency oversees your tap water, the stuff that comes out of your faucet at home. Bottled water is actually regulated by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, because legally, bottled water is classified as a packaged food product, and that distinction matters more than you think. Federal quality standards for bottled water were first adopted back in 1973, based on U.S. Public Health Service standards from 1962. Since then, the FDA has built out a framework that includes three key pillars. First, standard of identity regulations that define what different types of bottled water actually are. Second, standard of quality regulations that set maximum contaminant levels for chemical, physical, microbial, and radiological contaminants. And third, current good manufacturing practice regulations requiring bottled water to be produced under sanitary conditions. Now here is where things get interesting. The FDA requires bottled water plants to test for microbiological contaminants at minimum once per week, and for chemical and radiological contaminants once per year. Source water has to be tested for chemical contaminants annually and radiological contaminants every 4 years. Compare that to the EPA, which monitors total coliform and E. coli at hundreds of locations per quarter for a single municipal treatment plant, depending on the population served. A bottled water plant tests for those same constituents once a week. That is a significant gap in testing frequency, and it is one of the reasons why bottled water companies are fighting new laboratory standards that would bring their testing requirements closer to what municipal water systems already face. In April 2026, the EPA proposed adding microplastics, pharmaceuticals, PFAS, and 75 additional chemicals to the Safe Drinking Water Act's contaminant list. This is a massive proposed overhaul, and while this rule technically targets public water systems, the ripple effects would pressure the bottled water industry to match or exceed those standards, especially as consumer awareness grows. Speaking of consumer awareness, let's talk about what is actually in your bottled water that you cannot see. On January 8, 2024, researchers from Columbia University and Rutgers University published a groundbreaking study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. They found roughly 240,000 detectable plastic fragments in a typical liter of bottled water. About 90% of those fragments were nanoplastics, particles so small they can cross the blood-brain barrier and potentially the placenta. This total was 10 to 100 times more plastic particles than previous studies had found. Columbia environmental chemist Baizhen Yan said, and I quote, "This opens a window where we can look into a world that was not exposed to us before." So where are all these nanoplastics coming from? One major source is something you do every single day without thinking about it. How plastic bottle caps shed nanoparticles during friction is a fascinating and disturbing process. Every time you twist open or close a plastic cap, the hard polypropylene cap grinds against the PET bottle neck, shearing microscopic fragments of plastic directly into the water. On top of that, squeezing a bottle during manufacturing, transport, or drinking causes microfractures in the polymer, flaking off additional particles. Manufacturers actually store caps for a period of time before capping bottles, allowing slip agents to migrate to the surface to reduce friction. But even with that precaution, the contamination is significant. Now, the FDA has stated that current scientific evidence does not demonstrate that levels of microplastics or nanoplastics found in food pose a risk to human health. But Columbia chemistry professor Wei Min points out that the smaller a particle is, the easier it is for the body to misidentify it as a natural component of a cell. Once nanoplastics enter the circulatory system, they become systemic contaminants. The science here is evolving fast, and the regulatory response has not caught up. Let's shift to PFAS, the so-called forever chemicals. In April 2024, the EPA announced a final national primary drinking water regulation for 6 PFAS compounds, but the regulatory landscape has been turbulent. In May 2025, the EPA delayed implementation of standards for PFOS and PFOA, extending the compliance deadline to 2031. Then in May 2026, the EPA proposed 2 new rules, one upholding limits for PFOA and PFOS while allowing water systems an additional 2 years to comply, and another proposing to rescind regulations for 4 other PFAS compounds, arguing the previous administration failed to follow proper public comment procedures. Industry groups are challenging these rules in the D.C. Circuit Court. Meanwhile, the International Bottled Water Association, founded in 1958, has actually adopted voluntary PFAS standards more stringent than federal requirements, setting limits at 5 parts per trillion for a single PFAS compound and 10 parts per trillion for mixtures. Their president and chief executive officer, Matt Herrick, has said, quote, "Consumers can be confident choosing bottled water because it is among the most safe, affordable, regulated, and wholesome choices for healthy hydration available." But how transparent is the industry really? According to research, 18% of bottled water brands fail to list the location of their source, and 32% disclose nothing about the treatment or purity of their water. The FDA does not require independent third-party audits or product quality testing. NSF International offers voluntary certification that includes annual unannounced plant inspections and testing for over 100 contaminants, but participation is not mandatory. Now, testing premium alkaline bottled water brands in a lab reveals some surprising results. Essentia, often called the original ionized alkaline water, claims a pH 9.5 or higher. 10 alkaline spring water from the Great Appalachian Valley registers at pH 10, but not every brand lives up to its label. Independent tests have found bottles claiming pH 9.5 that actually measured 7.8. On the other end, Aquafina comes in at approximately 6, which is slightly acidic, while Penta measured at just 5.5. Fiji sits at 7.8 and Evian at 7.4. Some brands tout alkaline pH as a health benefit, but Harvard Health notes there is insufficient evidence to support those claims, and alkaline water could even be dangerous for individuals with certain medical conditions. This is a $451 billion global industry as of 2025, projected to reach $611 billion by 2033. 88% of Americans drink bottled water. More than 65% choose it as their primary beverage. The major players, Nestle, Danone, Coca-Cola, Primo Brands, and Suntory, are navigating a landscape where consumer trust is everything, and that trust is being tested. In March 2024, 1.9 million bottles of Fiji water were recalled for manganese contamination and bacteria. In November 2025, Meyer recalled over 38,000 gallons of distilled water. In February 2026, more than 650,000 units of Valley Springs artesian gold water were recalled due to improper sanitation. The bottom line is this: bottled water is not unregulated, but the gap between what testing is required and what science is now revealing is widening every year. 240,000 nanoplastic particles per liter, PFAS regulations in legal limbo, recalls affecting millions of bottles. The industry is at an inflection point. Whether you are reaching for a bottle of premium alkaline water or filling up from the tap, Understanding how your water is tested and what those tests actually catch has never been more important.